Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Yud in Masechet Horayot. We are at the beginning of the third chapter of Masechet Horayot, so we are just going to dive right in. I realize it did not open my screen yet, so let me share my screen and we will get started. So, the first two chapters have addressed what happens if you make a mistake, if the Sanhedrin makes a mistake in its ruling and everybody follows them. That was chapter number one. Chapter number two added the Kohen Gadol's making a mistake. Both of those are similar in that they have to involve a ruling. So just as the Supreme Court, just as the Sanhedrin needs to have a ruling in order for them to then have everybody follow it, and then there's going to be a par elam davar, so too with respect to the Kohen Gadol, even though the ruling is just for himself, he has to officially make a ruling. If he were to just do something b'shogeg, that would not be enough, and that would not trigger a sacrifice. He has to actually make a ruling associated with it. And now, as we did at the very end of the second chapter, we incorporate what about a melech? What about a nasi, the king? So, where is his situation in that? With him, there is no requirement for a ruling, and it's a different sacrifice. Whereas the Sanhedrin and the Kohen Gadol, when they make a mistake and then there's the sin that follows, an accidental sin that follows, and an unintentional sin that follows, there's going to be a par, a bull. But when it comes to the Nasi, the president, the king, it's going to be a he goat. And so let me share my screen. And again, we will get really started and we'll dive right in to the third chapter. So the Mishnah is going to focus on sacrifices offered when a Kohen Gadol or a king sins if they are no longer serving in the position. So let's take a look. Bottom of Tet Amabet. Kohen Mashiach Shechata V'achar Kach Avar Mimishchicha. So if the Kohen Gadol or sins and then he is taken out of his position, or similarly a king who goes away from his position, who sins and then goes away from his position, Kohen Mashiach may be par. The Kohen Gadol will still bring a bull, the Nasi may be seer, and the king brings a he-goat. Mashiach sha'avar mimshicha. So, if the Kohen Gadol first left his position, and then he sinned, and similarly, a king who left his position and then sinned, Kohen Mashiach may be par. Again, even though what's different here is that the Kohen Gadol, even though he left his position, he stays with the bull. He doesn't bring, he's not considered still a regular person. See? But when it comes to the king, Kehedyot, he actually brings the same thing that a regular person would bring, meaning a female goat or a female sheep. Okay, so Hashda Yesh Lomar Eved Avar Mishichu. So once you are telling me that if the Kohen Gadol left his position, as we turn to Yudam and Aleph, V'achar Kachota maybe par, and then he sinned, and even though he's no longer Kohen Gadol at the moment that he sins, he's going to bring a par, a bull. Chata V'achar Kach Avar Mishichu. So if in fact he sinned before he left his position, and then he leaves his position, tzricha l'meimar. Do you need to say it? Because what did we do in our Mishnah? We said two rules about the Kohen Gadol and two rules about the king. And one of those two rules about the Kohen Gadol, we would be able to figure out on our own. And so as a result, tzricha l'meimar, did it really need to be said? So, no, it did not need to be said. But Mishum de Katani Gabi Nasi, because we needed to teach it with respect to the Nasi, to ki avar Nasiu, so Va'akar Kachata Kehedyot Mighty, that the fact that even though he left the reign and then sinned, that he actually brings the same korban as a regular person. Because I might have thought that even if that if you say that, well, then if you tell me that when he leaves the reign and then sins, he brings like a commoner, I might think that the same thing is true, even if he leaves the position after he sins. And so as a result, the Mishnah needed to tell us both cases. Tani Gabi Mashiach. And so as a result, that's why the Mishnah also tells us the law of if he sins and then he is taken out, that the Kohen Gadol brings a bull. Because I might have thought that even though that's obvious, once you tell me that if he leaves and sins, he's going to still bring a par. Of course, if he's still the Kohen Gadol when he sins and he then leaves the position, he's going to bring the par. So, but I am going to tell you it because we're going to need to tell you the law with respect to the king. So we'll also tell you the law with respect to the Kohen Gadol. Okay.
What's the situation where the king is no longer the king? And
Well, we
usually
will get to that, but
usually a king is king for life, whereas
that is true.
A
That is
Kohen
true.
Gadol, I mean, he could lose his position because he does an Avera or whatever it might be, but it's a little odd where King Saul, King David, so forth, they were king for life. So what
Yes.
they become a commoner?
So excellent question. We are going to bring a case that we saw in Rashi yesterday, specifically the key case of Melech Uziyahu, who wanted to not just be the king, he actually tried to take on the role of Kohen Gadol as well, and he immediately got Sarat. And we are going to see from the psukim that he was no longer considered king. So, but we'll get there shortly. But minahanimili. So, how do we know the fact that when it comes to the king, if he leaves the position and then sins, he's going to be like a regular person? But if the Kohen Gadol leaves the position and then sins, he's going to be treated like a Kohen Gadol. So minani mili, how do I know? The Tanu Rabbanan. Well, we have a brisa that's going to teach us. V'hikriv al chataso, that when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, it says he brings for his sin. Melamed shemevi chataso misha'avar, that he brings for his sin even when he left his position. We'll see you tomorrow. Sheyachol v'halo dinhu, because I might have thought that we could figure this out through logic. That after all, couldn't you logically say the following? Uman nasi shemevi b'shigagas ma'isa, that when it comes to a king, he brings a korban that is when he just does an act alone to do shkaga. If he performs a sin, if he sins inadvertently, then he will bring a korban shogeg, as namely the he-goat offering. And so, whereas ein mevi chataso misha'avar, and yet he does not bring a korban after he left office, even though he is the very easy one to bring a korban. Mashiach, she'ein mevi b'shigigas ma'isa. A Kohen Gadol, as we said, doesn't bring a korban chatas if all he does is sin. Ella al ha'elem davar im shigigas ma'isa. Rather, he must have a ruling in addition to having the inadvertent act. And so, as a result, lo kol shekain, well, then he certainly shouldn't bring his special sacrifice. Again, it's very easy for the king to bring a special sacrifice. So when he doesn't bring the special sacrifice, I might have thought that similarly the Kohen Gadol would not bring his special sacrifice. Talmud Lomar, Tehikriv al chataso. He brings based on his sin, doesn't reference this pasuk, these words don't reference the fact that he's Kohen Gadol. Melamed shemevi al chataso misha'abar. He will bring his sin offering even if he sinned after he leaves his position. Well, now that we learned that in fact the Kohen Gadol is going to bring his sin offering when he sins after he leaves the position. Well, now we could use that same kal v'chomer to say that therefore the king must bring his special korban, namely the he-goat. Uma Mashiach she'ein maybe b'shigus ma'isa. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol, he, after all, it's really hard for him to bring a special sin offering, because it's not enough for him to just do the sin by accident alone, but rather maybe chatos misha'avar, and yet because he will bring a sin offering even after he left the position. Nasi shemevi chatas b'shigas ma'isa. But when it comes to a king, all it takes for him to bring a sin offering is for him to do the sin inadvertently. He doesn't need to have any kind of special ruling. Eino din shemevi chataso mishavar. Certainly, he should be something where that he would bring even after he leaves the office. Talmud Lomar Asher Nasi Yachata. That's why it also says, whereas the other pasuk was about the Kohen Gadol, this pasuk Asher Nasi Yechata, that the ruler is going to sin, that's about Kishahu Nasi in, that when he's the king, yes, that's when he's going to bring his special offering. But Kishahu Hedyot, as soon as he becomes a regular person, no, then he's not then he's not going to bring that position. So again, we will see shortly why it would be. Of course, we have in Masechet Yoma, why a Kohen Gadol might not be serving as the Kohen Gadol for any particular moment in time. He could have some kind of a mission, and therefore we need to appoint a replacement. But the bottom line is that for the Nasi, when is the situation that he's not going to be king? We're going to see that shortly. But now we have the next Mishnah. And the next Mishnah, having discussed sinning after concluding the jobs of Nasi and Kohen Gadol, the next Mishnah, which is essentially really part of this same first Mishnah, it tells us, well, what happens if the sin comes before one became Nasi or Kohen Gadol? So
why does the Kohen, I know we've stated it, but what's the reason why the Kohen still has to bring a par after he's no longer Kohen Gadol?
So the simplest, obviously, so again, it's a Xeris Akasov. So that's
okay, but what's
the key reason.
How can we
in terms of the logic,
right?
In terms of the logic, the logic that is given is that we say Ma'alin b'kodesh ve'ein moridin b'kodesh.
Well, that's in many things we say that.
I know, and that's that, and some people say that this is the key source, that specifically the Xeris Akasov in connection with the Kohen Gadol, who actually is a holy position. And it also highlights the fact that the king is not considered a holy position. It's just a position. And so as a result, when it comes to the king, whose source of the holiness is essentially HaKadosh Baruch Hu completely, and so as a result, that's going to be if he leaves the position, he leaves the rule. But when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, who is not just as we saw yesterday, he needs to be not just greater than his the other Kohanim in connection with his wealth, but he needs to be greater in all other dimensions as well, in terms of the quality of the person. And so as a result, that's why he is considered actually holy, and therefore when he leaves the position, he still is subject to the special rule.
Well, he's not. That's not completely correct, I don't think, because the Gemara in Yuma in the beginning says that the Kohen Gadol can be an Am Haaretz. He may know nothing about Torah, but because he descended from Kohanim and so forth, he's given the position, and they teach him. They put him in a room for 7 days. Exactly
100%.
So he may not be wiser than other people,
but he's
may not be more learned.
Right, but the point is that even in that situation, once he actually works and in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then he has effectively, and especially given that we're talking about a Kohen HaMashiach who's been anointed with the special oil, the point is that is not just an appointment, but rather it is actually a causing of the person to become holy. So you're right. Even if the person is not knowledgeable, and therefore they wasn't chosen for the good reasons, we are still going to apply this rule. And even if he leaves the position, because once he gets into the position, we're going to say that effectively he has served the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore in this role, and one could argue to some degree that this relates to the to the machlokas of whether the Kohen Gadol is sort of like the agent of the people or the agent of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, although I guess that applies to all of Kohanim as well. But the bottom line is that is the main explanation that is offered. But again, the bottom line is that it's Xeris Agasav, that the Torah says that essentially the Kohen Gadol, it gets treated differently from the king. All right. So what about if he sins before? If he sins before he's appointed and then he's appointed, Hare elu kehedyot. No, in that situation, whether it's the king or the Kohen Gadol, he's treated like a regular person. As Rashi says, Chatu ad shelo nismanu va'achar kach nismanu hare elu kehedyot. The Rabbanan, that according to the rabbis, Basar Chat Ozle, that we follow the time of the sin. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's not so simple. Im noda lahem ad shelo nismanu chayavim. You're right. If in fact their sin became known to them before they were appointed, and then they didn't have a chance to bring the korban until after they were appointed, well, then they would bring the regular sacrifice that a regular person would bring, namely a female goat or a female sheep. But Mishin Nismanu. But once they were appointed, and then they discover Peturim, then they are exempt. Because at the moment that they realize that they made the mistake, they are no longer subject to the same sacrifice. As Rashi explains, second line, end of the line, we'll just dive into the Rashi text itself. The Rabbi Shimon chata v'yedi'iyah bia. He needs, in order for you to be liable for a korban chatas, you need both. You need to have the same obligation at the time that you sin and at the time of discovery. V'hu and therefore he would similarly argue to Palag Rabbi Shimon Bereisha. He would argue about the first part of our Mishnah, where the person was appointed and then sinned and then was demoted. That if even though he was demoted after he sinned, it would not be so simple, because if in fact he discovered it after he was demoted, then he would also not have to bring a korban chatas. To Katani, nasi shechatav achar kach avar, that if in fact he sinned and then was taken down, migedula so from his position, maybe seir. The last Mishnah told us that he brings a seir, a he-goat. The Rabbi Shimon Kamar Nami, im nodalo, if he learned about it, well then Misha Avar de'ain maybe seir. Dechata v'yediyah by kishehu nasi. No, then if he only found out about it after he left his position, well, then he would not bring the seir that if he sinned, because because we need dechata v'yediyah by kishehu nasi, because we need both the sin and the knowledge to happen when he is the nasi. So that's the key element for Rabbi Shimon.
And that machloket, we saw that earlier near the beginning of the Masechta, where you need
that's correct, and it was cited,
or it's the time of the sin, whether you had to know about it from the time of the sin, or whether the yediyah.
Correct. It was this Mishnah that we were citing. That's exactly right. Ezehu Nasi, and who is the Nasi? Zem Melech, it's the king. Shenemar mikol mitzvos Hashem Elokav, because it says if he's going to violate, this is a pasuk. This is the pasuk in Vayikra Daled Kafbet, that if he's going to violate any of the commandments of Hashem, his God. What's the implication of his God? It implies she'ein al gabab ella Hashem Elokav, that the only one over him is God, meaning nobody is wealthier, nobody has control over him. That is only the king, only the top Jew of all at the time. So minanimili, how do I know all of this? The Tanu Rabbanan. Im HaKohen HaMashiach Yechata, that if in fact the Kohen Gadol is going to sin, so first we're going to prove it for the Kohen Gadol. Prat lekodmos. Well, the point is that it's going to say the Kohen Gadol will sin, is that it excludes sins before him. This is from Vayikra, Perek Daled, Pasuk Gimel. So v'halo dinu. Well, 1 second. Couldn't we figure this out without relying on the pasuk, using logic from the law of the nasi? Uman nasi shemevi b'shigigas ma'isa ain maybe ala kodmos. When it comes to the king, we know he doesn't bring base, and we'll see. We'll see the evidence with respect to the king in a moment, because we're going to go through this Gemara essentially a second time, where we go from the perspective of the king. But the bottom line is, we know that the king doesn't bring for sins that he committed before he became king. Well, Mashiach she'ein maybe al ha'elam davar im shigigas maisa Eino din shelo yavi ala kodmos. Well, 1 second. If the king, who can easily bring a sacrifice for his mistake because he doesn't require also having a ruling, he doesn't bring a korban for the special korban for the sins that happened before he got appointed, well, then certainly a Kohen Gadol, who only is going to bring sin offerings for a sin if he actually also has a ruling, well, then he should certainly not have to bring a korban for any sin that he did, a special korban for any sin that he did before he became Kohen Gadol. Lo, not necessarily, because im amarta b'nasi, just because you say it's true for a nasi, shekain ain maybe chatas misha'avar, that he doesn't bring a special sacrifice for when he sinned after when he left the position, right? So we know that from the last Mishnah. Tomar, but Mashiach shemevi chataso misha'avar. But 1 second, there is an element of the Kohen Gadol that is more likely to bring a special sacrifice, namely that the Kohen Gadol brings a special sacrifice if he gets demoted and then sins. And so as a result, maybe you might say that just as if he got demoted and then sinned, we're going to say that he brings a special sacrifice. Maybe hoelu, maybe chataso misha'avar, yavi ala kodmos. Maybe he should also bring for his sin before he gets appointed. So therefore, Talmud Lomar Hamashiach Yakata, that it specifically says that the Kohen Gadol sins. Chata kishehu Mashiach maybe kishehu hedyot eno maybe, that when he brings it, if he was before, once he's appointed, but when he sins before he's appointed, then he does not bring the special offering. Tanya nami gabi nasi kihai gabda, and we can learn something similar. We have a brisa similarly in connection with the nasi that's going to have this same argument. Asher nasi yechata, again, when the nasi sins. Prat lakodmos. That was the same verse that we cited before to show that even after the nasi is demoted, it's going to be that he brings the same korban as a regular person. But halo dinhu, again, but 1 second, maybe we could try and learn it all from the Kohen Gadol. Uma Mashiach shemevi chataso misha'avar einu maybe ala kodmos. When it comes to the Kohen Gadol, he does not bring a sacrifice. He brings the special sacrifice even after he is demoted, but and yet he does not bring before he's appointed. Well, nasi she'ein maybe chataso misha'avar eino din shalom yevi yavi ala kodmos. Well, a Kohen Gadol does not bring the special sacrifice after he's demoted, so certainly he shouldn't bring it before he gets the position. No, not necessarily. Mala Mashiach shekain ain maybe b'shigas maisa, but no, you know what? There is an aspect of the Kohen Gadol that is less likely to bring a korban, and therefore you cannot necessarily learn from the Kohen Gadol to the king, because a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a special sacrifice if he's only did an accidental sin, if he didn't also have a ruling. Tomar benasi shemevi b'shigigas ma'isa, but a king does bring if all he does wrong is have just the action and not without a ruling. Maybe maybe because he brings based on just act of an inadvertent act without a ruling, maybe he would bring even before he gets appointed, if he sins before he gets appointed. So Talmud Lomar Asher Nasi Yakata. So that's why it specifically says that when a Nasi will sin, to teach that Shechata B'Harehu Nasi, that he needs to sin when he's the Nasi. That's when he brings. But not when he sins, when he's a regular person. Okay, so now that we quoted when a Nasi will sin, the Gemara now brings three separate brisas that touch on that pasuk. That pasuk is the key element for three separate brisas. Tanarabana.
Just
Right?
clarify what ruling we're talking about. The coin bring has a ruling in addition to the sin.
Right. Remember that in order, just like the Supreme Court, just like the Sanhedrin has to say that they have issued a ruling and then the community sins based on that ruling, that's exactly what has to happen for a Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has to say, this piece of meat, even though it is no, even though yeah, he's going to say it's kosher, but even though this piece of chalev is not really kosher according to the Torah, he paskins that it is kosher, and then he eats it. And then that is the situation where he will have to bring his special sacrifice. But if, in fact, he takes a piece of meat and he's not paying attention and he thinks that it's a piece of shuman, but in fact it's a piece of chalev, and he eats it, and now he discovers, well, he never made a ruling about this piece, and as a result, because he never made a ruling, he is not going to be liable to any sacrifice. And so as a result, that's the situation. So that's the point. The point is that he is less likely to bring his special sacrifice, because it doesn't just happen if he sins inadvertently. He has to first make a ruling and then follow his action to sin inadvertently.
So how can we
Okay.
say, if we say a coin, for instance, in a scenario where a coin gadol is not a Talmid Chacham, maybe he's an Alma Aretz, and he's appointed coin gadol for whatever reason, what gives him the right to give Pesach Halacha? I mean, he's not a Rav, he's not a Talmid Chacham, he's not a Gadol Ador.
Yeah, I totally hear you. He could have no basis to have it. The point is that he has to make. The point is that it can't be like the inadvertent action for the rest of us is
Right.
about our having not understanding the full facts of the scenario.
I understand, but who's going to listen to him if he's not? I
The
understand
only
he's
person, no, wait. The only person who's listening to the Kohen Gadol when he makes his ruling is himself. You don't need the majority of the
oh,
community to sin when he's making the ruling. When he's making the ruling, the only person who's sinning is himself. When the Sanhedrin makes a ruling, then
right,
we need the majority of the Jewish people to sin. And depending on the opinions that we saw in the first parak,
right,
what kind of majority. But when
right.
he's making a ruling for himself, it's just him sinning, and
Uh-huh.
that's the situation.
So
Okay?
he's standing up and he's saying, "I think this is," making it out loud, whatever. And he
Yeah.
says, "I think this is Schumann. I'm going to eat it," without saying anything. So that's the difference. He has to say it somehow, or say
Correct.
it
Well,
in his
no,
mind.
I think even if he says it in
His mind.
his mind, it's sufficient. The point is that what's not covered is when he's uncertain about the facts. For the most of us, when we sin inadvertently, it's because we forget about some aspect of the law and we just go ahead and we do it. We're not thinking. But for him, every action requires thought, and that's effectively what we're saying with respect to the Kohen Gadol, that he needs every action to be thoughtful and to be deliberate and etc. And so as a result, if he does act in a non-deliberate manner, it's as if he didn't act at all.
Uh-huh.
So okay. All right, so Tana Rabbanan, Asher Nasi Yechata. So Bryson number one, it says that when the Nasi will sin, Yachol Gzeira. 1 second, that sounds like when the Nasi will sin. Asher Nasi. Is that going to be a decree that the Nasi is going to sin? That we know for sure he's going to sin? Talmud Lomer Ima Kohen HaMashiach Yechata. That if the Kohen that when it comes to the Kohen Gadol, it says if he sins. Ma lahalon kishiyakata, that just as over there, it means if he sins. So, and when he sins, avkan lakashiyakata. Also here, it means if and when he sins. Not that he's definitely going to sin. Amar mar, yachol gzeira? 1 second, how could you possibly think that it would be a gzeira? Gzeira mehekatesi. How would we have a possible negative decree like that? Amri, and they said, no, ain. Yes, we can see such a decree. Ashkechan, you can find it, Diksiv, V'nasati negat saras bebeis eretz machuzaschem. That Hashem says, this is in Vayikra Parak Yudalad Pasuk Lamed Daled, that I'm going to put saras on in the house of the land of your possession, which sounds like I'm gonna do it. Besora hilahem shenigaim vayim aleim. I'm telling you that this is what's going to happen. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon Omer prat linige onasin. No, the point of that pasuk is not to tell us that it's going to happen, but to tell us that there are certain kinds of tsaras that are not going to be subject to the regular rule. As Rashi says, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up from the bottom of the Rashi on the right-hand side of Yudam and Aleph, She'im bo nigoyim al yedei nefichas shade, that if in fact a tsaras comes because a demon blows on the person, delo mitmu, it's not going to cause tuma. It's not going to cause impurity. Lav Amar Rabbi Yehuda Besora. 1 second. Now, did Rabbi Yehuda not say that this was a Besora? Namely, again, that this is going to be something that's going to happen. So Hachinami Aim Exerehi. So as a result, that's why we could think that maybe when a Nasi is going to sin is actually a Gzera, Hilcha Ksiv Im, and therefore we have the Im in connection with the Kohen Gadol to tell us that really the Im is also in connection with the Nasi. Now, why do we then say Asher instead of that? Well, that's going to be the next brisa that we're going to do. But let's take a look at the rest of this. Well, Rabbi Shimon, Nige Onusin Milo Matamu. 1 second. Is it really true that if tsaras comes without anybody's participation, that they come sort of against the person's will? Vatanya, we have a brisa that seems to suggest otherwise. Adam ki, yeah, if a person will have, this is the pasuk in again Vayikra Yud Gimel Pasuk Bet. So min hadibor ve'elach, that this teaches specifically that when does tsaras cause tuma? Only after the mitzvah of tsaras was given. The halo dinhu. But 1 second, maybe we could figure that out logically. Timim bezav v'timim b'nagayim, when it comes to the tuma of a zav and the tuma of a tsaras, mazav min adibor ve'elach. We already know that when it comes to a non-normal flow from either a man or a woman, that it's going to be only from when the commandment was made. So too, I would know that saras only causes tuma from the time it was commanded. 1 second, no, not necessarily, because imamarta bizav, if we only had the ruling in connection with a zav, that only when the zav, only after we have the commandment does the ruling apply. Shekain ein mitame ba'ones, but there, when you have a zav, if something external, for example, if somebody exercised and thereby became a zav, or some other took some medicine and became a zav, Tomer bin, we don't say that you're going to be tummy. Tomer binagam shemitamim be'onis. But on the other hand, when it comes to saras, if something external causes it, you are going to become tamei. Oh, this completely disagrees with what Rabbi Shimon just said.
What about the shade?
That's exactly right. What he just said. So how do we understand this? So Talmud Lomar Adam Kiyah. And so as a result, the Brisa concludes and says, you know what? That's why we need to have Adam Kiyah. But now again, Minadibor Be'elach, that the mitzvah of Negaim, namely Tsaras, only applies from when it's commanded and not beforehand. But nonetheless, we see that we've got this question because again, Rabbi Shimon said that when it comes to the blowing of the shade, you're not going to be Tameh. But here we just said that Onis is Tameh in connection with Tsaras. So Rava Amar, Prat Nige Ruchos. Now, although there are some things that could cause tuma that are against your will, that it's the one thing that's excluded is nige ruchos, namely the blowing of the shade. And Rav Papa Amar prat lo nige shafim. It's coming to exclude witchcraft. So and presumably also the shade, meaning it's a broader category. And what is the category that is not considered, that is external, but would still result in your being tamei? That's a situation where there's a wound or a burn, and then it turns into tsaras. that I might have thought that, look, those wounds and burns, they didn't happen to you by your will. Somebody may have done it to you, or it was certainly not what you were trying to do. And so maybe I might have thought that in those situations, when they turn into tsaras, it's not going to cause you to be tameh. And so this brisa, and even Rabbi Shimon would agree that yes, in fact, in those situations, you would be tameh. So that is brisa number one. So now brisa number two, it's brisa number three that's going to tell us about why it says asher. Brisa number two is going to answer the question that Ken asked earlier today. So Tana Rabbanan asher nasi yecheta, that when a nasi is going to sin, prat lechola, it comes to exclude when the nasi is sick. Wow, Mishum Dahavale Chola, Idchele Miznisiyo. Say, one second, because he's sick, that's why he's going to be thrown out of his kingship? Of course not. That can't be. So Amar Avdimi Barchama, Pratla Nasishin Itzdara. No, the point is that what we mean by sick is that he has saras. That's sort of like the fundamental spiritual sickness. Shenamar, and we've got a proof. And here's our proof text. Our proof text is from Malachim Bet, Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Hey. Vayinaga Hashem es hamelech, that Hashem caused the king to have tsaras. Vayihi mitzora ad yomoso, and he was a tsarua. He had tsaras until the day he died. Vayeshiv bebeis hachavshis, he dwelled in the freedom house. Vayosam ben hamelech alabayas, and Yosam, his son, the king's son, excuse me, the alabayas. He was the one who was appointed over the home. So Midika Amar beveis hachavshis. Well, what does it mean in the home of freedom? So Miklal ad hashda eved haba. Until that moment, he was a servant. Meaning, as Rashi tells us, Miklal ad hashda eved hu. It's on the left-hand side of the daf. It's about 14 lines down. Miklal ad hashda eved hu. Haba.
Eved hava.
Eved hava. Deshrirus abdus who low, that this rulership is the sraros abdus hu low, that the rulership, excuse me, is as if it is a servitude for him. Lefi shemuto alav ol rabbim, because he has responsibility. He has the yoke of the responsibility of the public upon him. So, Kihad Rabban Gamliel, the Rabbi Yoshua. This is like a story that we had between Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua. Hava Azle Besina Sinta. They were going in a boat. Bahadi the Rabban and Gamliel have a pita. Rabbi Gamliel brought some bread with him. Bahadi Rabbi Yoshua have a pita visolta. And Rabbi Yoshua had brought bread and flour. Shlim pite de Rabban Gamliel. All the bread of Rabbi Gamliel was finished. Samach asulte de Rabbi Yoshua. So he relied on Rabbi Yoshua's flour because the trip took longer than expected. Amarlai, Rabbi Gamliel said to Rabbi Yoshua, "Mi haba yadat to havalan ikuva kulehai da'aita sulta." How did you know that we would be stuck so long that you should bring flour? Amarlai, that there's one star that rises every 70 years and misleads the sailors. I wonder whether it's actually a what's it called? The word will come to me. In any event, something that goes in and out of our solar system. But
meteorite.
I mean, not a meteorite. No, not an asteroid. Not a meteorite.
Comet?
A
Like
comet. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. A comet.
I was thinking of the cicadas that come out once every 30, 40
Every
years.
17 years. But how is that going to get a ship to go in the wrong direction? So I think it's going to be definitely something in the stars. So that's why I thought it was a comet. But Amarti, because you don't actually see, I mean, most comets don't move that fast, really, whereas an asteroid could move that quickly, especially an asteroid breaking up on Earth's atmosphere. But Amarti, Shema Yala V'Yase Osanu. And so as a result, Rabbi Yoshua said, listen, I know that this star comes out every 70 years. Maybe it'll happen to us. So Amar Lei, Kol Kach B'Yadcha V'Ata Ole B'Sfina. Well, 1 second. You're so smart. What are you doing on a ship? Because the only people who would go on a ship because it's dangerous, are people who need to do so for their livelihood. So Amr Le, Rabbi Yoshua said back to him, Ad sha'ata tameya Allah, you're wondering about me. Tameya al shnei talmidein sheyesh lecha biyabasha. Worry about the two students that you have on the ground, on dry ground. Rabbi Elazar Chisma, but Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada. Sheyodim l'shayer kama tipos yesh bayam. They know how many drops of water are in the ocean. Ve'ein lehem pas le'echol v'lo beged lilbush, and they don't even have food to eat or clothes to wear. So as a result, Rabbi Gamliel decided to put them in the front of the yeshiva. So originally, Rabbi Gamliel sent for them, and they didn't come. So he sent the second time, and then they came. Amar lahem, kemedumin latem shisrara ani nosein lachem. You think I'm giving you some kind of authority? No, yudam a bet now of this ani nosein lachem. I'm giving you servitude. I'm giving you a job to do. Shneamar v'yidabru elav le'mor im hayom tiyeh eved la'am hazeh. That they spoke to him, saying, "If today you become a servant to this nation." This is in connection with Rechavam, Shlomo's son, that Rechavam wondered what he should do. He had a very high tax on the people, and he asked for advice about what he should do. And the advice was, you got to make them want you to be the king. You shouldn't be a ruler over them like an evil despot. And so as a result, you should listen to the people and their burdens. And unfortunately, Rechavam didn't listen, and we ended up with Yeravam ben Nevat, who we'll see in just a moment as we turn to the third brisa. So Tanu Rabbanan, third brisa, Asher Nasi Yechata, again, the ruler is going to sin. Amar Rabbi
I have to wonder. I mean, just as an aside, after
I'm sorry, but we're really running out of time. I apologize. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Ashrei Hador, Nasi Shalom, maybe Karban al Shigaso. Praiseworthy is the generation that has a king that brings a sacrifice based on his unintentional sin. Im Nasi Shalom, maybe Karban, if that generation, the king brings a sacrifice, Tzorach Atalomar Mahu Lahedjos, well, then certainly what a regular person would do. V'im al Shigaso, so maybe Karban, and if he brings a sin based on his unintentional sin, Tzarach atalomar mahu dedono, of course he's going to feel terrible and do tshuva if he sins intentionally. So maskif lo rava berei de rabba. 1 second, if Asher tells us Ashrei, that for what he has deprived the sanctuary, he's going to make restitution. There's a pasuk in Vayikra Parakeh pasuk Tes Zayin where it says that it suggests that you're going to, when you steal from the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to pay it back. Does that mean that it's good to steal from the Beis Hamikdash? Over Yeravam ben Nebat, and Yeravam ben Nebat, the first king of Israel, who set up the golden calves, that he sinned and that he caused Israel to sin. Hakinami de Ashrei Ador. Who are you telling me that generation is lucky? No, of course not. Shiny Haka de Shani Kra Bidubere. No. The point is that everywhere else in those psukim where it says Asher Nasi Yechata, it says Im. It says, and Rashi tells us what it says. It says Im Kol Adas Yisrael, and it says Im HaKohen HaMashiach, Im HaNefesh, Im Nefesh. And so as a result, it's specifically here where it changes from Im to Asher. So that's where we could say Asher means Ashrei. Darash Rav Nachman Bar Chisda, my diksiv yesh hevel asher nase haaretz. There's something that's going to cause futility that takes place on the earth, and that also has the word asher in it. That the righteous are going to be treated like the wicked, and the wicked are going to be treated like the righteous. Is the continuation of the verse. Ashreim letzadikim shemagia aleim kemase harishaim shal olam haba ba'olam hazeh. That sorry, let me scroll so that you have the third. There's the third brisa, and now we're going to, having mentioned the connection between Asher and Ashrei, the Gemara teaches a similar lesson in the name of by Rav Nachman Bar Rav Chisda. That again, the verse says there's futility that takes place on earth, and so pasuk continues about the righteous and the non, and so the point is he says, fortunate are the righteous who are treated in this world according to the lot of the wicked in the next world. Meaning that if in fact a righteous person is punished in this world, that's a good thing. Because of course he's going to get the full reward in the world to come. And and woe to the Rishaim who get like the reward in the next world, meaning that they get a lot of pleasures in this world because they're going to get really punished in the next world. So Amar Rava says, I don't like that explanation. Atu tzadike ichle trei alme misagilu. Is there something bad about having a righteous person benefit in this world and the next? That shouldn't be bad. Ela amarava ashreim letzadikim shemagil aleim kemaisa harashim shel olam hazeh ba'olam hazeh. Oh no! The point is who's very fortunate? Fortunate is the righteous person who is treated like a wicked person in the world, in this world, meaning that just as a wicked person gets a reward in this world, if the righteous person gets a reward in this world, that's wonderful. And and the real woe is to the wicked person who in this world is treated like a righteous person might be treated in this world, namely that he doesn't get anything. That's really the biggest woe, because he's going to get punished in the world to come, and he's going to get punished in this world. So Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Brei, Rav Yoshua, Asul Kamei, Rav. They came in front of Rav. Amar lahu, Okimtun, Masechta Plan. Did you learn these two Masechtot? Amar lay, and they said to him, yes. Yitarisu Porta, do you have a little bit of something to eat in wealth? Amr lahen, in. They said yes. Dezavna katina da'ar. We bought a little land. Kari alayu. So Rava said about them, Ashreim l'tzadikim shemagia alem k'mazah rashem sheba'olam hazeh ba'olam hazeh. Fortunate are you that you have in this world, and God willing, you'll have in the world to come. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. My dixiv ki yisharim darkei Hashem b'tzadikim yelchu vam ufoshim yikashlu vam. What does it mean when it says that the roads of Hashem are straight and the righteous walk in them while the transgressors stumble in them? Mashal shnei bnei adam shitzalu psischeim. That it's like two people who have a Pesach offering. Echad achlu l'shom mitzvah. One eats it for a mitzvah. Echad achlu l'shom achilav gasa, and one eats it for the wrong reason because he's really full and he's going to eat it and he's just eating it because it tastes good. Zesha achlu l'shom mitzvah. Tzadikim yelchubam. The one who eats it for the right reason is a tzaddik who goes in this road. Zesha achlu l'shem achila gasa. But the other one who eats it for the wrong reason, b'foshim yikashlubam. That's the wicked are going to stumble in them. Amar le Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish said, 1 second. Rasha karisle. You're calling him wicked? Nehidalo oven mitzvah min amuvka. Sure, he didn't do the best thing. But Pesach let me lo kacha. But didn't he eat a carbon Pesach? Rather, it's like two different men. Both of them have their wife living with them and their sister. It's very dark at night, and the guy goes and he finds one of the women and he sleeps with her, and it turns out that it's his wife. And the other one happens to go with his sister. So the one who's with his wife, of course, that's the tzaddik. That the tzaddik gets directed, and so as a result, he does the right thing. But the other one who ends up doing the wicked thing, it's probably because he was wicked in the first place. Me dummy, but second, that's not really comparable to our verse. Anan kamrin and chadaderach. There's one road. So how kvahacha shnei derachim? And here you have them doing two different things. So at least in the first explanation in connection with the Korban Pesach, there was one Korban Pesach that's being eaten by both people, and they're both doing the same action, but one is doing it good and one's doing it bad. So Ella Mashal Lot Ushtei Benosav. So rather, we're going to say it's Lot and his two daughters. Hain is Gavner L'Shem Mitzvah. When they had relations with their father, they were doing a mitzvah because they wanted to populate the world, because they thought the entire world was destroyed. Tzadikim Yelchuvam. So as a result, they were doing something righteous. Hushin is Gavin L'Shem Avera. But he had no good proper intention. Ufoshim Yikashlubam. And so he, as a result, he was the negligent. He was the sinner who's stumbling in there.
He was honest.
First, before we get to that, we're going to say maybe he was intending to do a mitzvah. So I'm Rabbi Yochanan. No, when it says that Lot looked and left Abraham and looked and saw Sodom. Every word in that pasuk is indicating that he wanted to sin. Vayisas Lot, that Lot raised his eyes. V'tisa Eshes Adonav Eseina. So similarly, when Eshes Potiphar looked up and saw Yosef, she raised her eyes again, also for immorality reasons. Eseinav, his eyes. Vayomer Shimshon Osa Kachli Kihi Yashra Be'enai. That just like when it says to his eyes that were lifted up, so similarly Shimshon noted how get Delilah for him because she's so beautiful. Vayar, and he saw Vayar Osa Shchem ben Chamor. So similarly, Chamor saw Adina and was thinking about doing wrong things. As Kol Kikar Yardain, throughout he saw the entire plain of the Jordan. Kibiad Isha Zona ad Kikar Lechem. That when in Mishlei it says because of the paying a harlot, a person is going to be reduced to poverty and all he'll have is a loaf of bread. Kichula mashke, and he saw that it was well watered. So water is also in connection with the sin. Elcha acharei ma'avai nosnei lachmi meimai tzamri ufishti shamni v'shkuyai. That I'm going to go after my lovers who give me my bread and my water and my wool and my flax and my oil and my drink. And so the point is that you have the drink. And so too here you have the drink, shikuyai, and so as a result, all of these are terrible things that in fact indicate that Lot really had bad intentions. And now we ask Ken's question. One second, he didn't have any choice. He was drunk. He had no idea what was happening. It says that he didn't know what happened. Tana Mishum Rabbi Yossi ben Bar Rabbi Choni Lama Nakud Al Vav Shebekuma Shel Bechira. Well, why in the Torah is there a dot over the letter Vav in the word Uvkuma that she got up? Because lo marlacha shebeshichva lo yada aval bekuma yada. No, really, even though the Torah says that he was not aware of her going down or her coming up, in fact, he was aware of the coming up. Umay hava leila mebit. Well, 1 second. But if it was only when she left that he figured it out, what was he supposed to do? There was nothing he could do. So my dahava hava, it already happened. It was she was leaving. So nafkamina lefanya achrina. No, the point is for the next time. Lo ibai leila mishtei. He shouldn't have gotten drunk on the second night. So darash rabba. So having reference Lot, my dixiv ach nifsha mikiryas oz. Now the pasuk itself is really saying that a brother is better than a city. A brother in rebellion is better than a strong city. But the point is that we're going to interpret it sort of more literally. A brother in a rebellion from a strong city, umijanim kevriach armon, and fighting like the bolt of a castle. Ach nifsha mikiryas oz, the first part of the verse. Ze Lot sheperish mi Avram. That's Lot who separated from Avram. Umijanim kivriach armon, and the fighting that results in the bolt of a castle. Shahatil midjanim bein Yisrael la'amon. He generated conflict between Israel and Ammon. Shene'amar lo yavo Ammoni umoavi b'kal Hashem. That essentially the Jewish people are locked out from the Ammonites and the Moabites.
Last week's parsha.
Exactly. 100. Thank you for reminding me. That's exactly. I had a note to say exactly that. Darash Rabav Isema. Sorry, let me just scroll. Darash Rabba v'Isem Rabbi Yitzchak. Some say it was Rabbi Yitzchak. My diksiv l's'ava yivakesh nifrad b'chol tushiyah yiskala. That he seeks to isolate himself in order to satisfy his lust. He will be exposed in all wisdom. L's'ava yivakesh nifrad zelot shenifrad me'Avraham. The first part of the verse refers to Lot, who separated himself from Abraham because of his desires, as we saw the pasuk that we interpreted in earlier to indicate that all efforts of trying to act on those desires. B'chol tushia Yiskala, he will be exposed in all wisdom. Shenisgala kolono bevate kinesios bevate midrashot, that his shame is going to be shown in the shuls and in the study halls. Detanan Ammoni Moavi Asur and Isser Olam, that we cannot allow an Ammonite or a Moavi into the Jewish people forever. So I'm going to pause there. So now, well, 1 second, I didn't realize I forgot to scroll. I'll scroll that. So having referenced Lot's immorality, the Gemara now contrasts the immorality of others. But for that discussion, we'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Now, having covered the material, I'm happy to address your question, Ken. So my apologies for having to cut you off there.
Yeah, I understand. What was the question? I don't know.
All right. Well, I apologize for having
All
to
right.
cut you off, but if you come up with the question, we can certainly discuss it at the beginning of the daf tomorrow.
I'm just wondering. Well, now I'm wondering about the. There was the story of Yehudit and Sisera. How did she get permission? I mean, she went into to kill this general, but nonetheless, she had intent. Sort of. It looked like she might have intention. She brings wine to him and cheese. Was that right? That was the whole.
Right. So yeah, well, there that the whole question of actually, I don't know whether that story is going to get covered, but tomorrow we are going to discuss about sinful acts that are praiseworthy because of the fact that in fact, actually, we are going to talk about Yael tomorrow. So you're
Yeah.
your question is is in fact implicitly asked by the Gemara.
Oh, and then there's the story of Yehudit and the Hanukkah story. When she went into the general, gave him cheat, right?
Uh,
She gave him cheese right
yeah,
there.
yeah, it's something. I don't know whether that's also covered. But again, we'll see, God willing. Maybe it'll also be covered tomorrow. I don't know about that one, but the bottom line is that hopefully the answer for the first one will answer the
I mean, the
second.
story of Sisera, right? Where she
The
brings
story
him,
of
he kills
Sisera is
the
the one that
general,
we're going to deal with
and then
tomorrow.
that there's a reference to Rosh Hashanah because
Yeah.
their mother cried, the shofar.
Correct. You're right. It's a very nice Daf Yomi coincidence, as we have often the case, as we had just a moment ago in citing this past week's parsha. All right, Yishikoch, have a wonderful day. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.